The charismatic conspirator. Booth's bold beginnings. John Wilkes Booth entered the world on May 10, 1838, near Bel Air, Maryland, a place that sounded fancier than it smelled. He was born into what might be America's most insufferably self-important theatrical dynasty of the 19th century. His father, Junius Brutus Booth, whose name alone suggests he strutted out of the womb quoting Hamlet, was a world-class Shakespearean actor imported from England, along with the usual Victorian baggage of gin and Gothic madness. His mother, Mary Ann Holmes, started as his father's mistress and only received a wedding ring after a decade of bohemian domestic improvisation and a respectable pile of children. John was the ninth of 10 little Boothlings, half of whom died in childhood, proving even genetics needed an intermission. Among his surviving siblings were Edwin and Junius Brutus Jr., both of whom also succumbed to the family disease of theatrical ambition. His older brother Edwin went on to become the George Clooney of his time, moody, magnetic, and the better Booth, by far. He became what contemporaries called one of the most renowned tragedians of his time, a title that, in the grand cosmic joke of existence, amounts to being the most celebrated purveyor of artificial misery in a century already overflowing with the authentic variety. With a famous father who bellowed in theaters and a brother who wept beautifully on stage, John spent his early years marinating in emotional bombast, sibling rivalry, and theatrical narcissism. Naturally, he emerged from this stew both gifted and slightly unhinged, an entirely predictable psychological cocktail of inadequacy and grandiose ambition. The Booth household offered privilege garnished with chaos, a festival of tantrums and curtain calls. Papa Junius was a genius, yes, but also a roaring drunk, with the irregular rhythm of a poorly rehearsed dance number, who could turn family dinner into a Greek tragedy before dessert. And yet young John adored him. He inherited both the father's talent for stagecraft and his flair for instability. He bounced from one prep school to another, including a military academy that failed to discipline much except his handwriting. Though his education was sketchy, displaying what passes for talent among the privileged, looking handsome while reciting other people's words, and excelling at games invented to keep the aristocracy from the more dangerous pursuit of thinking. He did excel in public speaking and sword fighting, two skills he'd later combine with troubling efficiency. He was a dashing lad, tall, dark, and tormented, with the kind of cheekbones that made women swoon. Comely, charismatic, and charming, adjectives that history reserves for those who have not yet revealed their more homicidal tendencies. Booth collected admirers with the casual ease of a man who has never had to question his place in the universe. His education at St. Timothy's Hall, a military academy in Catonsville, Maryland, ended abruptly in 1852 after his father's death, thus depriving America of yet another mediocre military mind. Theatrics, treason, and the thespian turncoat. The official narrative insists John Wilkes Booth was a dyed-in-the-wool rebel sympathizer. Scratch that. An overzealous Confederate supporter howling with Dixie pride, his loathing for Lincoln as public as his mustache. Yet this supposed Southern firebrand lived not in Charleston or Baton Rouge, but in the North, surrounded by Unionists. His family? Solidly blue. His profession? Theater, that most cosmopolitan of callings. His birthplace? Maryland, that split personality state that couldn't decide between bourbon with Robert E. Lee or an Emerson quote. Maryland was the prototype for patriotic schizophrenia. Booth, raised amid this borderland confusion, allegedly developed an adolescent crush for slavery and Southern aristocracy, despite having no tangible stake in either. He saw Lincoln not as a president, but as a meddling, bearded despot in a stovepipe hat, who refused to bow to the cotton-crowned gods of Southern honor. Or so goes the script. Naturally, we're told, this fired his soul into a blaze of Confederate patriotism, and, like so many tragic Greco-Roman characters he loved to play, he snapped, succumbing to a hereditary madness, ignited by the war. But let's pause before we hand out Oscars for this performance. War fever he undoubtedly had, but this Southern patriot diagnosis has some gaping holes. One might wonder how the slavery issue, the states' rights issue, or the secession principle would concern or even interest him. First of all, Booth wasn't born in the Deep South. No plantation, no antebellum mansion, no inheritance wrapped in chains and tobacco. He had neither monetary nor emotional skin in the slavery game. No real reason to care, beyond the kind of performative outrage better suited to bad Shakespearean melodrama than genuine political conviction. The average secessionist was a sweaty provincial, terrified the Yankees would steal his cotton, his slaves, or his pride. Booth? He was a traveling celebrity, a sophisticate, a man of grease paint, not grits. The stage was his world, not the plantation veranda. One might even say he should have been naturally inoculated against Southern hysteria. An abolitionist and an assassin walk into a bar. Plot twist. Turns out our furious firebrand of the Confederacy was, all the while, secretly engaged to one Lucy Lambert Hale, a prim Washington socialite and daughter of Senator John Parker Hale of New Hampshire, one of New England's most prominent abolitionists. He was abolition incarnate, a staunch Yankee. Booth, a rabid Confederate sympathizer, viewed slavery not as a moral abomination, but as a natural part of Southern society. He saw abolitionists as moral mosquitoes. Yet Booth, who inhaled the sweet laudanum of Southern supremacy, was whispering sweet nothings to an abolitionist princess. Here we find a known Confederate zealot not only moving freely in elite Washington circles, but doing so while attached to the daughter of Lincoln's political ally. Booth attended Lincoln's second inauguration with a ticket courtesy of his future father-in-law, all while maintaining his public persona as an outspoken Lincoln hater. Let's pause and let that marinate. The man who would kill Lincoln attended Lincoln's inauguration, invited by a U.S. senator. If Booth was the poster boy for Confederate terror, how in God's shellacked top hat did he avoid being frog-marched into a military prison by Lafayette Baker's men? If the Secret Service had a most wanted list, Booth should have been number 1, complete with a dramatic woodcut illustration. Either Union counterintelligence was astonishingly incompetent, or Booth's Confederate credentials weren't quite what they seemed. The Richmond Grays, a casting couch mystery. So what gives? Was Booth a Confederate zealot, or something else entirely? Maybe a double agent, or an outright spy and agent for the North? The Richmond Grays episode presents another glaring inconsistency. It is generally assumed that Booth received the virus of war propaganda while in Richmond. In 1859, Booth allegedly joined the Richmond Grays, a militia group that attended John Brown's hanging. We're told Booth was there, in gray uniform, watching as the abolitionist messiah swung into martyrdom, the event that supposedly radicalized Booth. Photos place him near the gallows. The Grays were no social club, but part of the 1st Virginia Infantry, not the sort of organization that welcomes celebrity tourists for single-day memberships. You don't just show up, wear the uniform, and then disappear like a bad review. That's not how militias or armies work. Try doing that today in Ukraine and see how long you stay unshot. That iconic photograph of Booth in gray uniform near the scaffold, if not authorized by the actual Grays, who staged it? The whole affair smells less like genuine militia service and more like carefully crafted theater. Booth was playing a part as a Richmond Gray, and the real Grays in that huge crowd didn't catch on until after the fact, when they saw that silly photograph. So, if the Richmond Grays didn't give him the outfit, who did? Union intelligence seems like a good bet. After all, they knew the value of a good actor.